Welcome to Module 4, Critically Reading and Evaluating Academic Texts. Critical thinking is the foundation of critically reading and evaluating academic texts. Critical, in this context, does not mean to criticize in a negative manner. Rather, it requires you to question the information presented and the opinions put forward. It has been defined in many ways, but it essentially is the process of deliberate, systematic, and logical thinking on any subject while considering bias or assumptions that may affect your conclusions about a given topic or text. A critical thinker displays a willingness to have ideas or views changed as a result of evidence presented. To engage in critical thinking means that you are using reasoning to understand, identifying patterns or big ideas, analyzing what you are reading, evaluating evidence presented, and reflecting on your own knowledge and/or possible biases about a topic. Critical reading is closely connected to critical thinking. First, critical reading is active reading. It requires a deeper and more complex engagement with a text. Critical reading is a process of analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating. When we read critically, we use our critical thinking skills to interrogate the text, a skill that is crucial for effective academic writing. Second, critical reading requires multiple readings of a text. The first time to skim the text, observing subheadings, topic sentences, and broad ideas within it. The subsequent times, at least two more, consists of reading with a pen in hand, summarizing important passages in our own words, highlighting important terms, and asking questions as we read. Think about critical reading like being a detective combing through evidence and returning again and again to a clue. The first time we read, we absorb the text's surface meaning. The second time, and yes, even third time, we read a text, when we read the text, we should read with a pen in hand, writing questions in the margins, underlining key terms or ideas, responding to key passages either by summarizing them or noting what we want to remember. Third, critical reading includes taking into account a priori knowledge about a subject. This helps you decide what you think about a text in relation to a set of established criteria and to reflect on your judgment or beliefs about something you are reading. What do critical readers of academic texts do? They question what they read, they identify positive or useful and negative or weak aspects of an argument. They analyze and identify component parts of arguments so they can fully understand the author's ideas. They raise issues about a text. For example, is the research objective? Is there evidence of bias? Are the results meaningful and useful, or is it difficult to see how the research could be applied? They ask, are there long-term effects? Are there any gaps? You will be asked to critically read throughout this course and throughout the program. A strong ability to read critically prepares you for academic writing. The process of reviewing an academic text involves first skimming and noting the main questions that the text tries to answer and the main answer the author gives. Rereading and taking notes of the important points in detail, highlighting key terms and passages again, examining evidence, considering the conclusion, and making an initial evaluation. All of the key points of any critical reading. Then, the other reread allows you to review all of what you have summarized and highlighted and questioned while considering your biases, gaps, and implications, as well as how your own knowledge influences how you are receiving that text. As you evaluate academic writing, you will consider a number of questions that will prepare you for responding to that text. These are some of the key questions a critical reader asks and takes notes on when reading an academic text, in particular, evaluating an academic journal article. By conducting this kind of critical inquiry of the article, you will be preparing to write a critical review. Answer these questions as you read. Who is the audience? What is the purpose of the article? What research questions are being addressed? What conclusions does the author draw from the research? What kind of evidence was collected? Is there any evidence that could have been collected and included but was not? How good is the evidence? How well does it support the conclusions of the article? Are the author's conclusions plausible based on that evidence? Why or why not? Are there any assumptions underlying the article? How do these influence the conclusions? Are there any charts or tables provided? Are they clear and do they contribute to the article's argument in a meaningful way? Does the research make an original contribution to the field? Why or why not? A critical review, which you will begin in this module and submit in Module 6, requires you to examine an academic text based on certain criteria. A critical review can be of a book, a chapter, or a journal article, which is the type of critical review you will be asked to write. All critical reviews involve two main tasks: summary and evaluation. Your review should begin with a complete bibliographic citation in APA formatting that includes author, title of journal, name of journal, title of journal article, name of journal, volume, issue, date of publication, and the pages. Then consider if there is any biographical information on the author and how his or her qualifications affect his or her ability for writing the article. The introduction should give a general overview of the text, including the importance of the question being considered, your evaluation of the merits of the text with brief reasons that will be examined in more detail in the body of the review, and an explanation of how the review will be organized. A critical review of a journal article is a critical assessment, positive, negative, or a combination of both, of that article based on a number of evaluative elements. The term critical, again, means to question the information and opinions in an article and present your evaluation of the strengths, weaknesses, and validity. It is used to inform readers of an article's value through explanation, interpretation, and analysis. The reviewer must present information that will allow the reader to make a value judgment about the article. Good reviews convey the content of the article, the author's approach to the subject, and the author's conclusions. Good reviews place the work in the context of its field and give a sense of the work's significance. Good reviews present a balanced analysis of the article's strengths and weaknesses and illustrate those points with examples. Good reviews are written in clear, coherent language. Let's take a closer look at each of the main components of a critical review. Following the introduction, a critical review of an academic journal moves to a brief summary of the main ideas presented. It usually makes up a third or less of the overall review. The summary should include the main questions or ideas of the article, why the author thinks the ideas are important, and the summary should include a brief description of the argument or the answers to the questions posed and the reasons for the answers given. It should include reference to the methodology used to answer the question and a brief summary of the evidence used to support that argument. The summary portion of the review should end with conclusions reached in the article. All of these elements of the summary should be text-based and economical in nature. The evaluation portion of a critical review makes up the remaining 2/3 to 3/4 of the review. An evaluation refers to making a judgment on the article's strengths and weaknesses. It represents your judgment about questions such as, is the topic, issue, question raised in the article relevant, interesting, new, useful? Who will find it useful and why? Does the article give new answers or interpretations to an old question or issue? What claims are made, and is the argument consistent? Is the article detailed or brief, simple or complex? Is the evidence presented to support the answer extensive, strong, weak, persuasive, or contradictory? What kinds of evidence does the author rely on? How effective is the evidence in supporting the argument? What approach in particular was used by the author in terms of methodology? Qualitative, quantitative, analysis of current practices, case studies? How objective is that approach? Are the conclusions final, limited, qualified, or preliminary? Is there anything missing or not considered? Does this present a problem? What about the writing style? Does it suit the intended audience? Is the article well organized? In evaluating a text, you will be moving between summarizing, paraphrasing, and direct quotation as tools for explaining the author's ideas. It is important to understand the difference between the three. Summarizing does not match the original text exactly, but rather requires that you put the main ideas into your own words. Summarizing presents a broad overview, and that is why it makes up only about 1/4 to 1/3 of a critical review. You must attribute the ideas to the original source. Paraphrasing also does not match the original text word for word, but does take a specific passage and changes it into original language. You must also attribute a paraphrase to an original source. Finally, a direct quote takes a sentence or passage directly from the original and must be contained within quotation marks and fully attributed as well. Be sure that you cite in APA formatting, both in text and at the bottom of the review if you used additional sources in that review. Critical reviews are generally a combination of negative and positive comments on a piece of academic writing. In evaluating a text, it is important to be fair and balanced. Uncritical praise is not appropriate. Hypercriticism of a peer-reviewed text is probably not recognizing some value that a group of expert reviewers saw in the piece. You might want to go back and look at your own biases or something you may have overlooked. Use words carefully. For example, instead of, "The author does a great job," think about using more academic language, such as, "The author conducts a thorough analysis." Instead of, "The author wrote a terrible article," more academic language requires more specificity, such as, "The author's ideas about this question do not seem applicable," and give sound reasons for that. That said, generally reviews are either more positive or more negative, even while acknowledging the counter views. Critical reviews don't need a conclusion, so you must decide whether to include one or not. If you think a conclusion is necessary, you should summarize your arguments on your overall view of the text. Observe and take note of well-written critical reviews to see how the author begins. Here are some examples taken from the text Academic Writing for Graduate Students. The authors present a plausible case that, however, less adequate is their discussion of, or the author takes on the difficult task of, unfortunately, or the authors have written an important and timely article on, despite its many strengths, there are a number of small but important weaknesses. Another one might be, not only has the author presented some valuable new information, he has also presented it in a very clear and coherent manner. In addition, there are some similarities that exist in language, as you will note when you read a variety of journal articles. Some of these similarities involve the use of reporting verbs and phrases, such as the author begins the article by claiming. These are used to tell the reader what the author thinks. Modal verbs and phrases, such as for example or could probably, are used to express degrees of certainty. Finally, an adverbial clause called concessive clause can be used to describe a circumstance that is in contrast to another circumstance. In academic writing, concessive clauses are a way to acknowledge the strength or validity of an idea before presenting an alternative view. For example, though by no means the first writer to employ stream of consciousness in a novel, Virginia Woolf stands out as a master of that style in her novel To the Lighthouse. This type of clause can demonstrate fairness and balance. When reviewing excellent work, you might use language such as scholarly or original or compelling. If your response is more couched, you might consider writing that the work is sound. For poorer work, a frequently used adjective refers to thin results or research. Understanding the language of academic writing can help you write effectively yourself. There are a number of sublists of words that appear most frequently in academic writing, but these are viewed as the top as recognized by Middlebury College and some other sources. Notice words on this list such as analysis, authority, data, estimate, identify, interpret, method, principle, process, research, significant, and theory. It's not surprising to think that these and the others listed frequently appear in academic writing. A link to the full list, over 1,000, is provided under Resources later in the lecture. I suggest you refer to it as you engage in your own academic writing tasks. So, when beginning your critical review, keep in mind the structure we have discussed. Headings can be helpful if desired. The introduction, generally 1 paragraph for a journal article and 2 or 3 for a longer book review, include the author and title and briefly explain the topic of the article, state the aim and summarize the main findings or key argument, and conclude the introduction with a brief statement of your evaluation of the text. This can be positive or negative, or, as most common, a mixed response. The summary covers the key points with a limited number of examples. You can also briefly explain the author's purpose throughout the text, and you may briefly describe how the text is organized. Again, the summary should only make up about 1/3 or less of the review. The evaluation is a balanced discussion and critique of the strengths, weaknesses, and notable features of the text. Use specific evidence, integrating paraphrasing and direct quotes of the author's words. If your critical review is more positive than negative, then present the negative points first and the positive last. If your review is more negative than positive, then present the positive first and then the negative. The conclusion is usually a very short paragraph in which you restate your overall opinion of the text. Here are some links to academic word lists that you might find helpful. I will provide a separate video in which we examine a sample critical review together. The purpose of this module is to learn how to critically read and evaluate academic texts and engage with the work of other scholars, to integrate evidence, properly adhere to citation guidelines, and to begin to write a critical review in response to a peer-reviewed journal article that is relevant to your own identified problem of practice. Again, bear in mind an excellent critical review will accomplish the following: summarizing the author's article, effectively using the author's text to support and develop your review, effectively integrating evidence in the form of direct quotes and paraphrases, employing scholarly conventions for citing sources, recognizing the uses and limits of the author's argument, be organized in a clear way, and use appropriate academic language. I hope this lecture has provided you with some helpful information as you undertake these tasks. I look forward to reading your work.